Miskell, the publisher EMS2, and thank you for joining us today for the second episode of our new webinar series, EMS2 2.0, How the Electronics Manufacturing Industry is Evolving. This series is intended to explore the evolving production requirements for electronics manufacturing as we move towards the factory of the future. This series was really the outcome of many interviews and discussions that I had and listened to during this pandemic that we've all gone through, that really underscored the fact that the business processes were changing. And I think the pandemic was truly an accelerator of many trends, and industrialization and digitalization are two such trends that directly impact the EMS industry. So we launched this series as a way to speak to companies that are in these areas, working with these issues. And so we invited guests. Last time we spoke to an OEM, today we speak to an EMS. And as always, I'd like to thank Bright Machines for agreeing to sponsor this series and allowing us to have these conversations. I would also say to our audience, while I have more than enough questions to ask these gentlemen, we do invite your questions throughout the webinar, if you wish, using the question tab at the bottom. If you go to chat, I will find you there too, so not to worry. Our guests today are Mr. Steve Frisch. He's the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer with Plexus Corporation, and Mr. Amar Hanspal, the CEO of Bright Machines. Gentlemen, thank you both for your participation today. I will also say congratulations to Plexus, since y'all had some really good financial news last week, underscoring your performance in a difficult environment. So congratulations to you and your team, Steve.
Thank you, Eric.
What I'd like to do, as I always do, is ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and your organization for the benefit of our audience. And Steve, why don't I begin with you on that one, sir?
Sure, Eric. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Obviously, Steve Frisch, COO of Plexus Corp. Plexus being a $3.5 billion player in the electronic manufacturing space. I've personally been with Plexus 30 years, so I've seen quite a bit of the industry grow. It's been an interesting career, all at Plexus. So started as an engineer and worked my way up to where I am today. Plexus really focuses ourselves on trying to serve customers with higher technology or demanding regulatory environments. We go after three verticals: healthcare, life sciences, aerospace and defense, and industrials. And our focus is trying to help those customers, make the world a better place. And we do that by offering design services, manufacturing service, aftermarket services, whatever they need from a manufacturing standpoint, allowing them to bring their products to market. So, like you said, it's been an interesting career, an interesting 6 months, and I'm happy to be here to talk to you about it today.
Very good. Thank you, sir. And Amar, please.
Thanks, Eric. My name is Amar Hanspal. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Bright Machines. Bright Machines is building a software-first platform for industrial automation. And another way to think about it is we're deploying intelligent assembly lines for our customers. So customers come to us and say, can you give us a fully automated production line to build product X? And that's what we deliver to them. And that is a combination of hardware, software, and process engineering. But what's really unique about what we're doing that hasn't been done before is our emphasis, our invention has been on writing the software. So that enables flexibility, standardization, quick deployment, lower costs, all of the things that have prevented broad scale deployment of automation previously. We're about a 2.5-year-old company. Prior to that, I spent kind of like Steve. Steve spent 30 years at Plexus. I've spent almost 27 years at a CAD/CAM company called Autodesk, and I had many roles there. And then started Bright Machines in 2018 with a few colleagues here around the world, and we've been pursuing this mission ever since. And really happy to be here, Eric and Steve. Great to have a chance to join you on this webinar.
Well, thank you both for that. I appreciate that. Let's begin with kind of the big gorilla in the room this year, as we were joking before, which is the pandemic. Nothing to joke about. That's not what I meant. But why don't you tell us the impact that the COVID has had on your business operations and where your operations stand today in that regards? And Steve, maybe we go to you again, sir.
Sure. As I mentioned with my long career, I've seen the dot-com crisis. I've seen the financial crisis. I've never seen anything like the COVID crisis and the pandemic we're facing today. And quite frankly, I hope I never see another one in my career. With that said, Plexus has 17 manufacturing sites across the globe and 8 design centers. And what was unique about the pandemic, or is unique about the pandemic, was our focus first had to be on the employees, because to be able to deliver for our customers in our manufacturing sites, we needed our employees to come to work. And so the CEO and I made a commitment that we were going to make Plexus the safest place to work outside of people's homes. And so our priority number one was really ensuring that the infrastructure inside of Plexus really supported a safe and work environment so that employees felt confident when they came to work that they were in a safe environment. And so from a response standpoint, that had to be number one, but closely followed that was obviously the customer response. And again, being a global issue, the magnitude of this was every single day was a new challenge as we started our path through this pandemic. Fortunately for Plexus, we have a very robust crisis management protocol. And so across the globe, we had our leadership team meeting every day, really talking about what customers' needs were, what issues we were facing with employees. And for us, and I think really kind of the aspects of the importance of data, in this case, really got brought to light, because for me, I was able to sit at home and literally see real-time forecast changes for Plexus across the globe. So if we saw a customer forecast changing in China or supply chain issues in Malaysia, I could sit at home and monitor and measure those, and then really kind of have conversations with my team on a single or every single day. And so for Plexus, it really went from a kind of a proactive leadership to a very reactive leadership for several months to basically make sure we understood what was going on. And to put the order of magnitude to you for Plexus, our healthcare life science sector is our largest sector. And our top 10 customers in the month of March and April, the top 6 changed their forecast double digits increases. So they had demand for more product, but the 4 of the top 10 customers decreased by double digits. And so, I appreciate the comment, Eric, about, the nice quarter we had, but to put it into magnitude, there has been a lot of volatility, and, at the end of the day, Plexus is netted out positive. But it's really caused us to make sure that we can respond and react to customers across the globe. I'm happy to say, I think we've made it through the reactive parts, and we're back to being proactive with customers as we look forward. But again, it really put an emphasis on the need for access to real-time data from our manufacturing and ERP systems.
Mm-hmm. And in that respect, the technology was a real enabler. I mean, go back 20 years, it probably wouldn't have been possible to this degree.
Yeah, I don't know how we would have responded to customer requests and with solid answers in terms of what we could or could not do without having the technology in place. It would have been impossible.
Right. Amar, how's it been for Bright Machines?
Yeah, so Eric, we saw the pandemic play out in 2 different ways. One is what it did for our customers, and then what it did to our operations. So, with our customers, a lot of what Steve said is what we saw. We work with EMS companies, we work with OEM companies, and, around February, March, the first reaction, excuse me, and that's not a sneeze, I promise you, that, early in the year, I think everyone was just struck by, manufacturing is, as I've seen it, is, 1, it's dependent on access to physical space. 2, it's dependent on people, especially in areas like Asia. And then it depends upon, as Steve was mentioning, good forecasting. And all of that was tossed out of the window in the beginning of the year. Like, it was very high levels of uncertainty. So I think we just saw a screeching set of brakes being applied the entire manufacturing process earlier in the year, and it was a lot of gloom and doom. Now, as time went by, I think customers got a little bit more confident, and as parts of the world were able to get things under control, we saw a little bit of return to normalcy. So I think in the short term, we certainly saw a huge impact on our customers, operations, cash, thinking, et cetera, et cetera. I would say in the medium to long term, it has highlighted or accelerated some of the thinking that people have been thinking about all digitization, automation, industry 4.0, and it's always been like, okay, it's a good thing to do, kind of like cleaning your garage, like this is a good thing. But this really highlighted that there's a reason to so we've seen acceleration of a lot of that agenda on our customers, board discussions, resiliency, reshoring, all of these things have come to the fore. So I think the pandemic in the short term created a huge amount of disruption, but in the medium to long term, it sort of kind of highlighted manufacturing's urgent need to, sort of evolve. And we were, I think, impacted quite similar to our customers, because at the end of the day, although we're a software company, we apply the software to hardware and we deploy the hardware in customers' factories. And we kind of we couldn't access people's factories. We learned to do things remotely. We learned to deploy things and monitor things remotely, even demonstrate our value proposition remotely. Like, here's, these intelligent assembly lines. Well, here they are, over video kind of thing. So we learned to adapt, but we also saw that there were things that we needed to reimagine in our operations, for a universe where you didn't, you started having to think more like IT companies think about data centers. Like, how do you access things without having access to the physical space? But, that's all a longer conversation about what technology can or cannot do.
No, that's very good. And I like your comparison to cleaning out the garage. I think it's something many of us actually did do during the pandemic, right? It was one of those chores. So let's start. You both touch on many kind of issues we'd like to follow up with here, but let me start big picture with, and maybe Steve, start with you here. Kind of, what is your perspective on the evolution of electronics manufacturing and how smart manufacturing is bringing about a shift on the factory floor?
Sure. I believe electronics manufacturing is an evolution. I mean, when I started with the company, if you could place a BGA on a board and test it, that was wonderful. And so the evolution has continued for the last 30 years. It's going to continue going forward. Where we sit today, from my perspective, is we have, for the first time, really kind of the tools and the technology, from my perspective, to be proactive at really understanding what we're going to get when we go through some of the first articles that we build. Historically, you'd build something, you'd take a look at the manufacturing process, you learn from the mistakes, you do Pareto charts of quality issues, you'd go conquer the high issues first, and really kind of work your way through coming up with a robust manufacturing process. I think those days are gone. We have the ability to simulate. We have the ability to really be more predictive about what should we expect on first articles as things come through the manufacturing process. What efficiencies should we get out of the production line? And so I see this shift happening towards really a bit more predictive from a manufacturing standpoint. And I think lots of people would think that is being driven by the economics and the efficiencies. My personal opinion, and the reason Plexus is really kind of more focused on it, is the concept of coming up with zero defects from day one. I think if you go back into 2014, 2015, especially in the aerospace space, but it's evolved from there. A significant demand on that concept of zero defects. You're going to ship no defects to customers. And so for me, the ability to do that, or your way of doing that, really requires you to be more predictive up front, right from the design process, supply chain design, all the way through, making sure that with a very short period of time, you're able to achieve really significantly high quality levels for customers.
Excellent, excellent. Amar, what's your perspective on that?
So I'll build on what Steve said is, I mean, I think the the EMS world has been around or been evolving for the last 20, 30 years. And I'd say certainly EMS 1.0 was built upon getting really good at these managing factories, large labor teams, and supply chain management. It was a huge core competency of people who are in the EMS business. And I think supply chain management is going to continue to be a huge component going forward. I do think that building on what Steve's saying is, I think EMS 2.0 is not so much labor management, but effective use of digital technologies. And digital and automation become, I think, the core of what the manufacturing practice is going to be. And the people who learn how to do that really, really well are going to be the ones that separate themselves from everyone else. And I think the other thing that I've been noticing is that the folks that emphasize customer service, a lot of manufacturing has always been about cost. Cost never goes away, but I do think that the battleground is shifting a little bit towards, because if I think about OEM customers who are under pressure from their customers, a lot of what people want from their manufacturing partners now that I hear is really good collaboration, whether it's zero defects, fast time to market, like they're looking for a higher service quotient. And I think it all comes back to, I think technology, of course I'm biased, surprise, surprise. I think technology in the form of data, automation is really going to be a core building block of how manufacturing companies evolve going forward.
Interesting. So let me follow up with you on that then, Amar. So what do you think, in your opinion, are some of the bigger changes in technologies that you're seeing, and what are those next steps in technology?
I think there's four things that have changed dramatically in the technology infrastructure. I mean, the two that everybody sees around us all the time is how much cheaper cloud computing is and how much more data you can now capture. So it's this combination of vast amounts of data and large amounts of compute that have become available. When you talk about machine learning, AI, I mean, machine learning is pattern recognition. And in the most basic way, it is looking through lots of information and finding patterns in them. I mean, we talk about neural networks and GANs, and I could throw a lot of buzzwords at the end of the day, they're very sophisticated mathematical techniques to look at vast amounts of data and find patterns so you can predict, so I think that's the first thing. Large amounts of data enabled by sensors and lots of things, and large amounts of compute that let you now do things that you couldn't do differently. This is why Uber can tell you it's 8 minutes away. Your taxi's eight minutes away. It's not just GPS. It's that they have predictive modeling on what traffic and everything is, right? So I think that's the first thing that has changed dramatically, data and amounts of compute. The second thing, or third thing now, is that is dramatic in the world of manufacturing is, computers could count before. Now computers can see. So the growth of computer vision is a huge enabling technology to be applied to this world of manufacturing. And one of the reasons we started Bright Machines is we saw that using computer vision, we can do a whole bunch of things differently. I can mention the most obvious thing is inspection. Like, okay, how do you inspect things? Today humans are inspecting, or you have those stupid AI machines doing it, but you still need humans in the loop, right? All those things can be dramatically done differently because of autonomous driving, because of drones, all these things. Computer vision has gotten a lot better, and you can really apply that to the problem at hand. And I think the third one and the fourth one in our case is this sensing technologies, robotics, end effectors, all of those have started becoming cheaper and a little more robust. I mean, robots have been around almost 50 years now, so they're at that curve where their level of robustness, reliability has gone really way up, and the costs have started coming way down in terms of, that's why cobots are not that expensive. So you combine all of this, you say, okay, robots, vision, elastic computing, and lots of data. You can start to see, you could really build a physical infrastructure that's hugely responsive. Now, this is a 20, 30 year, it's 10, 20, 30 year arc to realize all of it. But this is one of the reasons I keep trying to, sorry, of course I get a spam call in the middle of this. One of the reasons we keep using the analogy from the IT industry is it's really hard for you and I to remember that 30 years ago, managing IT infrastructure in large companies was exactly like managing factories are today. Everything required people, every cable had to be plugged in by hand. And therefore, I do see that the way the IT industry has evolved, it's a vector that the manufacturing industry can learn from. It's not exactly parallel, but there's lots of things in common. Sorry, it's a long answer, but I think technology, those capabilities are going to dramatically transform manufacturing. It's all a question of when, not if now.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Steve, what do you think on this?
Yeah, I would agree with Amar on a couple of good points. One is I do believe that vision and facial recognition and pattern recognition is changing the industry. A simple example for us is one of our solutions for COVID is we installed cameras in our lobbies with temperature sensors. And so every employee that walks in the building, every guest automatically gets their temperature taken in real time as they're coming through the factory. And so, those things that, in the past, you'd have to have someone sitting there with a thermometer trying to measure the temperature. So obviously you can apply that into the manufacturing process and you get significantly higher throughput, with those types of technologies. I would also agree that, the quantity of data that is now available is increasing exponentially. I think it's also creating one of the challenges. What do you do with all that data? How do you process it? And what do you learn from it? And for us, that really started with making sure that we had, single instances of systems across the globe. And so a couple of years ago, we made a significant investment to install a standard ERP system across the globe. So all 17 of our sites run on a standard platform. And that flows down not just from ERP, but even to our global shop floor processes, really our production process systems. And so some of those investments we're starting to be able to leverage to make sure that we can improve what we're doing, either from an efficiency standpoint, or again, for me, you're going to hear it a couple of times on the quality side. And so one option that vision gives you is, you'll hear people talk about torque drivers as a technology that's great for figuring out that you're inserting the right screw. But how do you know that that operator is trained to use that torque driver? Well, if you have a camera in front of the station, the operator can walk up, the system should be able to look at his or her training records and make sure that that person's been trained to operate that equipment. And so that when they go to use it, it's tying it all the way back to the HR record systems is what you can do with a vision system. And so, but again, that's a lot of data, it's a lot of processing, and you need to invest, in your data systems and your data centers to be able to do that. And that is areas that Plexus has been significantly invested in. The other area that we're looking at quite a bit is process automation. And this applies to the manufacturing world, but it also applies to finance. Really kind of applying automated process steps to like the back office. We now look at some of the back office process we do in our financial and our accounting systems. And we're using bots on the computer systems to basically run through the manual process that may be required to process an invoice or a purchase order, and really kind of looking to extend it across the entire spectrum of the company. But it really takes a shift in mindset across the organization to be able to start doing those types of things.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're talking about the automation, which kind of begs the follow-up. So what are some of those broader trends in automation that you're seeing? People talk, and I'm specifically thinking about kind of on the factory floor here. People talk about and you've referenced the need for more resilient manufacturing, you know? So what is that? And what do you need to achieve that?
Yeah, I think Amar hit on some of this as well. But if you look at some of the specific things that we're doing, the use of autonomous vehicles that was a concept that was applied. It's been around for many years, but for Plexus, which is focused more on the mid to low volume type of products, investing in a huge architecture and infrastructure that is not very adaptable and adjustable just wasn't feasible. It was economically, it didn't make sense because our manufacturing floors are changing significantly every single day. There's something that's changing on the manufacturing floor, either ramping up a new product or transferring a product. Again, a lot of changes going on. And so the advent of autonomous vehicles that can learn the aspects of cobots that can take a repetitive process and learn it relatively quickly, those technologies which were cost prohibitive because one, from a cost standpoint, but two, from a feature set standpoint, they couldn't really learn. They didn't really fit into our manufacturing system 5-6 years ago. Today, they're hitting a price point where they're not only viable and possible, they're actually the right thing to do because they add a lot of other improvements into the process in terms of error-proofing things and, again, helping employees from repetitive processes not have to repeat the same step over and over again.
Yeah. And Amar, that kind of goes to the sweet spot of Bright Machines in some ways too.
Definitely. I mean, Eric, I would say, build on what Steve was saying is that what I see with automation, look, I had heard this statistic from someone, and it's been hard for me to believe it, but I now see it in the wild, is that only 3% of the production lines in the world have high levels of automation. So you think about all the production lines that are out there, and only 3%. So despite all the robots that are sold and all the beautiful pictures you see of these Tesla lines and yellow arms or orange arms or whatever color arms you see, kind of dancing in synchrony, there's a huge gap in terms of how widely deployed automation or digital technologies has been. Some part of it has been risk averseness on the part of customers, like something that's working, why mess with it? The other parts of it has been, the economics of automation have not been great. So I think when you ask me what I start seeing in automation that's starting to change, one part of it is, we talked about the technologies, but the combination of these things is making it easier to deploy automation. It's making it somewhat more inexpensive to deploy automation. And it reminds me a little bit, and guys like us, what we're trying to do is, years ago, you saw, Steve was talking about ERP systems, right? If you rewind the clock 20 years ago, ERP systems, CRM systems, HR systems, it used to cost $40 million and 4 years of your life to deploy. And that's SAP, that's these are good products. SAP and Siebel and whatever, PeopleSoft, these was 20 years ago. And then along came SaaS, which kind of integrated the stack and said, okay, here's the application. We can combine all this servers and all this kind of stuff, and Salesforce, NetSuite, all these guys, Workday, change the speed and economics of deployment. I think that's what guys like us are trying to do. Is with Bright Machines, we're saying, you know what, we'll do the heavy lifting, we'll do the integration, we'll simplify all of this so we can move that 3% of deployments to a much higher number. And the reason it's important is what I consistently hear from customers is that the three things they'd like to see different in their manufacturing operations. One, they want to build where they sell. So they want to build closer to their customers. This idea of the centralized factory halfway around the world, for whatever reason, tariffs, pandemic, whatever, customer wants to buy local, like that, they want to change that. If you look at the second thing, Steve touched on this, customers want to do higher mix, lower volume runs. At the end of the day, actually, they want to go to N=1, right? That's the best high mix, low volume, where the volume is N of 1, that they could build everything custom. So they want to go there. And then third, they want to be able to dynamically handle any disruptions in their, whether it's supply chain or, I mean, right now, if the server that's connecting the two of us gets cut, without you and I ever having to do anything, the masters of Zoom will automatically reroute it to another server that will keep this connection going. Like that's, if I think about the future of manufacturing, someday people want to be able to do those three things, and none of those three things are possible if you don't have a higher content of automation. Like you can't build where you sell if the cost differential remains high. You can't do high mix, low volume if you don't have infrastructure that lets you deploy very quickly and be very flexible. And you can't have resiliency, dynamic resiliency if things are not like digital or based on data. So I do think these are all things that play to our wheelhouse, but I'm not trying to be
No.
Maybe I'm doing a little bit of an advertorial for a company, but the time has come to integrate all of this, and just like SaaS, just make it easy for people to deploy what was once slightly esoteric, expensive technology.
Interesting. Steve, I saw you nodding some in during that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on that are driving and will continue to drive the manufacturing requests from our customers, and that is e-commerce and the customer's customer, so my customer's customer, what their expectations are for delivery. The concept of annual forecasts and 12-month forecasts, I think those are gone. I want to push the button on Amazon.com and have it delivered to my house, not tomorrow, but this afternoon. And that is flowing down from customers where, again, it used to be more of your ability to do long-range planning and forecasting. And now I think it's changing. The world needs to be able to produce at the speed of what the end consumer wants. And I think that is driving, I think long-term, it will continue to drive some of the sourcing models for OEMs. You do have the pandemic, which I think is going to change the way people source. It's going to cause them to think about it. We have this thing called the election tomorrow, which I think politics will also change things. I don't want to turn this into a political discussion in any way, shape, or form, but I do believe that those dynamics will also change the way OEMs think. And again, it's going to force all of us to really take a look at what does it take to put together the right solution to deliver for our customers. And I do believe that the velocity and the need to produce higher quality at a faster pace is going to continue to escalate, and that will push companies and organizations to think differently about how they achieve that.
No, and I appreciate that, because the follow-up there is, I think of an EMS as having this incredibly complex environment in which you have to manage all the varying needs, competing needs at times of all your different OEM customers, right? And so you have to be masters of managing complexity and change. But when you look at those, and if we think of the factory of the future, what are those demands and expectations and needs that are impacting how you do things on the shop floor?
Yeah, so if you combine what I just talked about with the fact that I also believe OEMs are investing less in their own IP or knowledge as it relates to manufacturing, they're starting to take a look at what, and this is a trend that's been going on for a while, it's not just starting, looking at what is the core competency that they need to develop themselves. And I think a lot of customers are figuring out it's that intimacy with their end customer. It's not the intimacy with the manufacturing process. And so they're relying more and more on companies like mine and Amar's to come up with creative solutions to help them achieve that. And so really they're asking, again, whether it's Amar or myself, to help them figure out creative ways to not just, produce a better manufacturing line or a better product, but to help them gain a competitive advantage with their customer. And they're asking us to be more intimate with really understanding what are their challenges, as opposed to, the days of the past where it's, build the print model, give me the blueprints and I'll go build it. Again, they're really looking for us to help them create those solutions. Excellent.
Amar?
Well, I agree with what Steve's saying. I think you get customers in two camps, right? You get, so what's happening in some ways is because of things like e-commerce, as Steve pointed out, the fact that customers are the OEMs customers are becoming more demanding, their ability to deliver a great customer experience to their end users is what is going to win or lose business for them. And as a result of that, it puts pressure on what would historically be the back office. And in a weird way, I'd say the back office is now the front office, right? I mean, before I say anything about manufacturing, I just point out two of the things that you and I use in our daily lives. The amazing experience we have with Amazon.com or with Uber is all because they took what was a horrible thing in the past, which is like in retail is all this warehouse logistics, and in transportation it's all this sort of fleet management stuff. And by getting really good at that, they've delivered a really good end user experience. So I mean, if you're an OEM that's trying to deliver a good customer experience, what you need is a back office that's great, that enables you. You can't deliver a good customer experience if your back office is like archaic. And and when I say back office here, definitely finance, but even your manufacturing operations. So for that, you have to choose whether you build or you partner. So you will have some customers who will absolutely insist on building themselves, which some of them are completely capable of doing that and investing heavy amounts to digitize their manufacturing operations, to do all of that. And then you're going to have people who turn to companies like Steve's as partners. And this is not different than Amazon built their own infrastructure and other people are turning to Shopify to build their infrastructure for them, to do deliver this good experience. So I think just by using those two digital analogies, that's what I think is happening is people are realizing in order to win with their customers, their back office is now the front office. And so they need a great back office, and they either have to make a decision to invest heavily to to change their own, or find a forward-looking partner who can deliver them a really amazing manufacturing back office, if you will.
Okay, interesting. Steve, I'd like to follow up with you on something we've touched upon here, which is Industry 4.0. And so my question is we hear a lot about that. We've heard a lot about it over the last few years. So how important are those concepts of Industry 4.0, and how would you rate their adoption by the industry, the electronics manufacturing industry so far?
Yeah, I view the concepts as very, very important. There's multiple elements, obviously, that go into Industry 4.0. And I think when you say that, people may first start talking about automation and really kind of looking more at the manufacturing process. But it really is the value proposition is when you start tying all of the individual pieces together. And I agree with Amar that the back office process and really looking at your IT systems and your ability to integrate the equipment sets is where the value starts to get added. And that can be a daunting task for people. I know it is for Ploxis. By no stretch of the imagination are we done on our journey. We have a long ways to go. But the recognition that you need to have the infrastructure in place, and whether that's in the resources and people and processes to be able to pull the data together. For example, our surface mount equipment used for placing components on circuit cards. We used to go through this long process every month in terms of doing preventative maintenance on that. Well, the manufacturers of that equipment now have applied intelligence to those machines where they tell you when they need to be basically serviced, and they tell you what needs to be done. And if you can build that into your production process and really drive that to make sure that you're being more efficient with your resources and only doing it, really kind of doing the maintenance when it's required. But above and beyond that, start looking at the failure rates and the issues of the equipment will start telling you what it needs to have done. The question is anybody listening? And I think that's the challenge for a lot of the companies is a lot of people are building intelligence, and a lot of devices can be connected, smart devices that can be connected to everything. But I think the big challenge for a lot of people is how do you pull all that data together, and how well can you really use it? And so for us, it was investing in the infrastructure and making sure that we could capture that data. And we're really kind of on a journey now of taking a look at which of that data can we really use to continue to improve what we do for our customers, whether that's through efficiency or quality, or internally, how can we make someone's job a little bit easier? Because again, we can predict what's going to happen and really be more intelligent about what the factory has to offer or the equipment has to offer for us.
No, very good. Amar?
Yeah, I think Steve said it well. Look, I think Industry 4.0 was a good way to frame sort of the evolution or the priorities of, what technologies could be useful. I do think a lot of what Industry 4.0 previously sounded like was, the application of what they used to call cyber physical systems, but it really comes down to just creating a data-driven manufacturing operation. I actually think that in a very simple way, creating a digital data-centric manufacturing operation is really what Industry 4.0 is. So you forget all the buzzwords. I mean, too much of Industry 4.0 is people, industry presenting to industry. Like, okay, here's my set of slides, here's your set of slides, here's all my 5 buzzwords, here's your 5 buzzwords. At the end of the day, I think it's applying these new technologies to very practical problems: forecasting, preventive maintenance, production automation. Like, I think that's where the industry has to land, and it has tremendous potential, to drive it forward. I think data will do to manufacturing what electricity once did to manufacturing. Like, it really can propel it forward. I like the way Steve framed, higher quality, faster speed. You're not going to get that by just throwing, amping up the horsepower of the machines. That's just not going to, the only way you move forward is data is the next sort of turbocharger for manufacturing. And I think the time has come to stop doing PowerPoint slides and start solving business problems with this thing.
And if I can, Eric, I agree with Omar on this one wholeheartedly, in the fact that it can be Industry 4.0, especially if you're in the beginning of the journey, can be daunting. All the buzzwords, the investments, all the things that people may think they need to do to start realizing value. And from my perspective, you don't need to start there. That's hopefully where you end up. But where you start is looking at a problem that you have today, whether it's an efficiency problem or a quality problem. And if you have the capabilities yourself, great. If you don't, you work with companies like Amar's, and you really kind of solve that first problem using and leveraging the technology that's available. And then you start building upon it. And you start building a culture in your organization where one success builds upon another. And again, I think that if there's one recommendation or one thought process I had in terms of how do you get down this journey, it's just that. Don't start by trying to solve the world's problems. Solve a few little ones that you have internally and go from there.
Yeah. Listen, I'm going to interject with a question from the audience here because it seems appropriate. And let me just, the question is how much of this transformation do you see as company private or secret versus the need for building industry standard solutions? They go on to say high rates of failure are continuing to be reported. So how much of this is because of lack of cooperation at an industry level? And what do you think is needed here? Steve?
You asking me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's a balancing act in a perspective. I do believe we need more industry commonality and agreement on some of the things that we're doing. The interoperability and some of those things I think would help tremendously. And we belong to several organizations where we share best practices about the things that we're doing. And so from my perspective, there is a lot more that can be done in terms of adding commonality across the spectrum. With that said, in the last several years, there's also been some significant strides on and really kind of looking at protocols and other things that allow you to share data much easier. With that said, and kind of the true, in my mind, the true spirit of production and competitive advantage, I do believe companies can use this as a competitive advantage to get ahead of their competition and to build value for themselves and their customers. And that is one of the things that I try to do with our teams is to push the envelope in terms of what are creative ways we can apply technology to solve customer problems better than anybody else. And at the end of the day, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of it that is kind of patentable IP that is really going to create, really innovative for the things that we're doing. Anything that's going to kind of create, IP from a patentable standpoint. But I do believe manufacturing process and the ability to produce products is a value add proposition that Plexus plans to retain some of the proprietary knowledge, but again, I believe there's a balance between the things that we develop and the kind of sharing and understanding of common challenges that we all face and solve those problems together.
Yes. Omar, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I'll build on what Steve says. Look, I think it's really hard to develop competitive advantage on tools. I mean, let's just give you an example. I mean, people have hammers and screwdrivers and SMT machines and whatever, so I don't think that, or CAD/CAM tools or whatever you think, I don't think tools is where you create competitive separation and say, look, these are my tools and you can't have access to them. I think even data, to some extent, some data has to be proprietary. I mean, I do think that there is some, and some data has to be shared, and I think that line can get pretty gray. We were talking about, like, you do need, when you want to work better with your customer, there's obviously some things you need to expose, some things you don't want to expose, So I think data is a slightly grayer line, but I think the crux of where you develop competitive advantage is what Steve touched on in his answers. It's really how you practice. So it's like your process is where you develop your difference. I just look at, I mean, to me, business is sport, right? I mean, look at two teams that are playing a sport. They have access to the same stuff. I mean, both kicking you're kicking a football or shooting a basketball. There's nothing proprietary about that. At the end of the day, it's what plays you run, how you work with each other. That's where you create competitive separation, who you have on your team and who you don't. I think that's the competitive thing. Now, the other thing that was implied in the question is, how can you get people in the industry to cooperate better? And, I think this is the truth in almost any situation that you're dealing with in the technology industry, is that I think you can get vendors to cooperate when there is a win in it for each of them. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. And I don't think, any two vendors cooperate because of the altruistic benefit of the industry. Seriously, I mean, this is like, for 70 years, I've seen, like, even in the automotive industry, people have said, there's all these standards, IGES, VDAFS, all this. Like, can the guy who's doing this work with the guy who does that? Like, unless there's a joint economic interest, it's really hard to drive standardization in many situations. But there are some good things that are showing up in the manufacturing shop floor. Machine to machine communication is one of them, and there are other standards that are developing. And I think really at the end of the day, you got to develop a win-win, economically for people to work better together.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Let me, we're going to have to wrap here. I just looked down and realized I'm doing a horrible time managing the clock because it's actually, I'm just engaged in the conversation. But so what will, and maybe Steve, I'll go to you first with this. What will the impact of all the technology changes we're talking about on other aspects of your manufacturing operations? And I'm thinking in terms of the human side, right? I'm thinking of like staffing levels and the required competencies of the staff that you have. How's that impacted?
Yeah, I think people's first reaction when you start talking about automation and using machines to do work, I think their first mindset is, oh, well, that's bad for employees and that's bad for workers. The reality is pre-COVID, we were struggling across the globe, whether it be our facilities in Europe or in Asia or here in the US, to find enough workers for our facilities. So to be honest with you, one of the things that we actually started down the path of automation early on was just the acknowledgement that finding enough people to man our factories as we were growing was a challenge. It was almost a business necessity. And so, for me, I do believe, in the aspect that the things that we're doing are creating more opportunities for employees to get into a higher level of career and position by doing this. We're taking the repetitive, lower value add, and from my personal opinion, and it's been reflected back from employees, the things that are less rewarding for our employees and replacing them with with automation or with a robotic process that can simplify things. Nobody wants to sit in front of a spreadsheet and type in a bunch of numbers for 8 hours a day when, again, an automated process can go do that for them. And so for us, I don't see a significant shift in terms of the labor force inside of Plexus, other than I think and again, I think this has happened throughout history, is that as you add more technology to whatever problems you're working on, the skill force, the skill of the workforce continues to rise and increase. And I've seen that happen with Plexus over my 30 years here. And I hope to see it, at least for the next 10 to 15 that I'm still here.
Amar, what's your perspective on
that? I think we're definitely on the cusp of a lot of reskilling that needs to be done. I think, as technologies get deployed, I think that's a natural consequence. And I think, I don't think we should be afraid of it. I think we should embrace it. I do think the future is better. I mean, yes, you will go through a little bit of a dip where there's some displacement, but I agree with Steve that, every industry, every historical period, you go through reskilling and you come out, in a better, stronger, more productive other side of it. My other sort of hope, I would say, is that one other aspect I'd love to see happen with the deployment of technology is that manufacturing gets somewhat simplified and less intimidating. What I say, if I was somebody developing a product today, thinking about how I get it made is kind of a daunting idea. It's like, how do I make this or whatever? I have a brilliant idea for a new blood pressure sensor or something like that. I wouldn't know the first way to get started. Like, how do I do this? And my hope is that as digital technologies take hold, that becomes simpler. Like, we could just digitally interface with Steve's company. I would upload my model and he'd come back and say, hey, I can make 5 of these in Romania by Tuesday for $27. Like, we need to get to a place where that becomes easier, because if that happens, I think it would unlock innovation. And I do think that the other thing that can start happening is as manufacturing adopts digital technology and becomes easier and more customer friendly, I think you would see more and more engineers trying to do more and more entrepreneurial things, either as their main job or as a side job. And I think that will be a wonderful outcome for the world. So reskilling and innovation are the two things I hope, I am looking forward to the next 7 to 10 years of manufacturing.
Okay. Well, it sounds like both of you have kind of retirement dates in mind there. Yours sooner than Steve's, Amar, but we won't hold you to it. That's good. Listen, we're coming to the end here, and I just want to thank you both, because this has been, a very, very interesting and informative discussion, and I think, and it certainly has engaged me. I completely lost track of time here on my side. So, so really, I'd like to, Amar and Steve, both of you gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Thanks for taking time to share your perspectives with the audience as well, because I think it's important to hear from people who are doing the work, so to speak, and others look to it for some guidance and hopefully some pearls of wisdom that they can apply in their own operations. So, so I just want to say thank you to you both. Thank you for your time. And I wish you, maybe the first one, to wish you happy holidays heading into the end of the year. So, so gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.